Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in, much appreciated. And today we're going to start another series. I've been doing a series you guys may have seen on beginning techniques for anglers, for the beginning bass angler. And I also want to start a series on the advanced philosophy, advanced techniques for certain of the top bass fishing techniques out there. I think there's room for beginning, intermediate, and advanced both. But today I'm going to sort of wade into the waters a little bit and talk about the advanced stuff. So anyway, before we get started, just want to remind everybody a couple different things here. If you guys are interested in becoming members of the channel, I'm offering memberships to the channel, do my weekly update or my weekly reminder. As a member, great way to support the channel. You get additional videos that aren't seen by the public every week. Access to my personal email for your fishing questions for some memberships. And like I said, it's a great way to help the channel out. If you're interested, you can go to the About section on my YouTube main page and click Intuitive Memberships, and it'll give you info for that. And also, if you guys are interested in any on-the-water lessons with me, shoot me a private message on my Facebook page and I can get you updated on that. So, okay, let's get into this a little bit here. Before we get into this, I want to reiterate these advanced tips that I'm going to give you guys. They're not for everybody, because you're really going to want to have to learn to have patience to sit through this, because it's almost like a college class or a classroom lecture a little bit. So if you're looking for instant gratification, quick tips, that type of stuff, this is probably not going to be what you're looking for. This is more of somebody that wants to turn this video on when you're driving or whatever, and absorb what I'm going to tell you here. So let's get into this jig fishing here. When we're talking about advanced jig fishing, there's jig fishing, in my opinion, it's sort of like jerk baits in the fact that it's the most there's more variables involved in the technique than any other techniques out there, jerk bait and jig fishing. So there's a lot of different things, offshoots that we can go off in, that we will at some other point, but specifically I want to give you guys a foundation of some advanced thought on jig fishing, and we'll get into the other stuff at a later point. But one of the first things you have to realize in jig fishing is that it requires a little bit different mentality than other type of fishing, because when I am fishing jigs, I'm probably sacrificing some bites for quality. For most of the time, you're going to average anywhere between a quarter to half pound larger bass than you will on most other lure categories when you're fishing with a jig. So the first thing you have to do is you have to make sort of a mental shift in your way of thinking, that you're simply not going to get quite as many bites. You can still have good days and you can still get lots of bites on a jig, but for the most part, you're sacrificing bites for quality. So internally, you have to make that shift right off the bat. The jig styles that I want to talk about, I want to cover a little bit of everything, but primarily I'm going to talk about the flipping and pitching jigs, and I also include that as a casting jig, and then the football head jigs, excuse me, and the finesse jigs. Some people can argue, swim jigs and, swing head jigs, but to me, that's a completely different category. When I'm talking about I don't really consider a swim jig a jig. I consider it more of it's a moving bait. It's not fished like a jig, so I put that in a different category. But today we're talking about finesse jigs, pitching and flipping, which are the same jig, and the football head jigs. So let's talk a little bit about pitching and flipping jigs right off the bat. The guys, there's a couple elements that you really have to understand to get the maximum amount of success when you're pitching and flipping jigs, which is my favorite way to fish them. I probably, when I'm jig fishing, I'm pitching and flipping probably at least 70% of the time, and everything else is the finesse jigs or the football heads follow up with that. But there's a couple different considerations when I'm pitching and flipping that I've learned about that really make a big difference. And those considerations are: number one, profile of the jig; number two, the weight of the jig; and number three, the color of the jig. So profile, weight, and color. Profile has a lot to do with maximizing the size of the fish that you're going to catch. And you create profile on a jig based upon how thick the skirt is, how many skirt layers are involved in the jigs. I tie my own jigs. We'll get into that in a later video. But for example, most of the time, most jigs that come in the package, when you buy a jig, it has 2 skirt layers on it. That's the bulk that is created with those 2 skirt layers. I'll use anywhere between a layer and a half to sometimes 3.5 layers of skirt material on my jigs to create different variations in bulk as far as the profile goes. Along with the profile and the bulk of the jig from the strands of the skirt is your trailer. Your trailer size, not only your trailer size, but how you rig your trailer also creates different levels of bulk. For example, you can have like a Zoom Super Chunk, and you can thread the thing on, and it creates a smaller profile than if you hook it on like the old Pork Frog, which creates a larger profile. So understanding how profiles appeal to different bass is very critical. For the most part, what you're going to find is when I'm using a pitching and flipping jig, I like to try to get away with the biggest profile I can, simply because a bigger profile, it catches bigger fish. And I think that's one of the foundations that you have to realize in bass fishing, is there is a lot of truth to that old adage that, big fish like big baits. That's really true. So using that big profile jig, 3 skirt layers, threading the trailer on like a frog, is one of my favorite ways to fish it when I'm pitching and flipping. Now, the times that I want a smaller profile in a pitching and flipping jig, like less skirt strands, a more compact trailer, smaller profile, is when I may have some type of a change in water clarity or the mood or the personality of the fish. If I'm fishing at a place that's got a little bit cleaner water, maybe the fish are a little bit more heavily pressured, maybe it's after a cold front, maybe it's the weekend and there's a lot of trolling motor noise, sometimes that's when I'll downsize the jig to a little bit more diminutive look on there. And you'll get a feel for this, because after a while, especially once you start tying your own skirts and experiment with trailers, you can sort of get a feel for the profile that the bass want. Now, tied along with profile, or tied closely to profile, is the jig weight. Again, on the pitching and flipping jigs, the weight of a jig, the size of the jig, is directly related to the fall, how quick that bait's falling. And everybody knows, if you guys are watching this advanced video, you know that fall rate has a lot to do with slow baits, and particularly with jigs, because a lot of times when you're flipping and pitching a jig, your bait is over some type of a limb or object, it's more hitting vertical in the water, and that rate of fall has a lot to do with generating a strike. Now, another thing to remember too is the rate of fall is also directly affected by the profile of your jig. For example, if you have a 1/2 ounce jig and you have it tied with 2 skirt layers and a smaller trailer, it's going to fall completely different than a jig with a skirt layer that's got 3 skirt layers and a larger trailer, especially if you're using something like a rage crawl that basically drags a lot of water. So there's a lot of different determinations as far as how the weight of your jig is affected by your overall jig design. So not only is the weight affected by that, but also your line size is going to affect the rate of fall. Your line size, the bigger pound test line you have, the slower it's going to fall. So you have to take all of this into consideration. You have to take the weight of your head, you have to take the line size, you have to take the line type. It could be braid, monofilament, and fluorocarbon. Braid and fluorocarbon is going to fall faster than mono, so that's another consideration. So there's a lot going on when you determine fall rates. So that's when you're creating your jig, you have to take that all into consideration, because of, say for example, if you want a faster falling jig, you may have to go up to a 3/8 ounce, or excuse me, a 3/4 ounce head if you have a big profile jig, to get the same fall rate that you do with a 1/2 ounce jig if you have less skirt layers, lighter line, that type of stuff. So this is something that you have to experiment with, because nobody, that you can have some idea on what's going to work with that, but ultimately the fish have to tell you with that. There are some clues out there that you can use: water temperature, water clarity, time of year, the type of cover that you're fishing, all that type of stuff adds up, to picking this right one. But you have to start somewhere. So you can start out with a jig that you're comfortable with. If you're not getting bit, you can make some adjustments, on profile, size, and that type of stuff. The third thing we'll talk about is color. Color, again, water clarity plays a big role in the color that I select on there, but it doesn't play all the role in it. When I'm talking about skirt colors in a jig, I'm talking about usually it's a combination of the water clarity, and it's a combination of the sunlight condition, how much light penetration we have in the water, and the mood of the fish. Generally, I like to go with a darker jig. If you can go with a darker jig, it catches bigger fish than a lighter colored jig almost every single time. Again, you sacrifice the amount of bites that you're going to get by going to a darker jig. But the times that I like to go to a darker jig, guys, is usually early in the morning, or if it's low light, or if it's raining and cloudy. Even if the water's a little bit clear, some type of a black and blue, black and chartreuse, maybe some type of like a dark peanut butter and jelly that's got a dark look to it. Those are the first things I go to, because they do produce bigger fish. And as the sunlight penetration, light penetration gets greater, as the water clarity gets a little bit clearer, as the fishing maybe gets a little bit tougher, that's when I go to the more natural tones, the more browns, the green pumpkins, that type of stuff. So color is a big key on the skirt, and as well, it's a big key on the trailer. One of the things that you'll find out in jig fishing, in fact, I think what we'll just do, let me rephrase this. This is going to be a long video, so we'll do advanced finesse jigs and advanced footballs later. We'll just stick to pitching and flipping now. But one of the things that you're going to realize with the trailers on there, the trailer colors, is that sometimes they want a contrast, sometimes they want something that sort of matches the jig a little bit. As a general rule of thumb, what you're going to find out is bass will prefer a contrasting jig skirt and jig trailer, again, if the water clarity is a little bit off color. Like if you have water visibility of less than 2 foot. If you've got water visibility of greater than 2 foot, that's when I sort of like to stick with the matching type trailers, like a green pumpkin trailer with a green pumpkin skirt. And I'll highlight it a lot of times with either some dye on the trailer, or maybe some accent skirt color, or maybe like a little bit of orange with my green pumpkin, something a little bit different. I very seldom use the exact same jig trailer and skirt color together. I want to have some type of a contrast there. But contrast on your skirt colors and your jig trailers is totally a matter of experimentation. I've seen some wild combinations work. I remember I was fishing a tournament one time at Bull Shoals Lake with my jig fishing mentor, Terry Thomas, and we got onto a bite. We were using a solid black jig with a solid chartreuse pork frog. I mean, solid piece of chartreuse pork frog on a solid black jig in clear water. And catching big ones. So you just never know with that. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you things that should or shouldn't work with contrast. That's something you sort of have to experiment a little bit with that. So just to reiterate there, like I said, I don't want this video to go on and on, because I know everybody's got time, they got to do stuff. But I just want to reiterate for our first advanced jig fishing show here, pay attention to your profile of your jig, your rate of fall, and the color. You know, become sort of a master at studying those three elements, and that's going to give you a really good foundation to build up from there that we'll talk about later. We'll go into later videos about where you need to fish it, how you need to manipulate the jig, tackle setup, all that, hook set, all that type of stuff later on. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. Again, thanks for tuning in to videos. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't, and we'll be back soon with another one. See you.